been thinking a lot about binaries lately. And, oh, that's funny. I was sitting like this. It's a fascinating impulse to categorize. And not just to categorize, but to like oppositionally categorize. Because this came up in the context of talking about how there's a tendency I've noticed in queer communities that I'm involved with of like the rejection of the gender binary only to then develop a new binary, which is binary or non-binary gender. And it's just, it really is this very human, it seems, impulse to like have things be one or another, have things be like this way or that way, and we just don't like gray areas. Even people who move almost exclusively in gray areas don't like gray areas. And a thing that's been interesting about the process of moving through my own shadow work and my own like reactivity has been noticing how much of a tool that is for the maintenance of the ego for me, but I think for a lot of people too, where it's the maintenance of your self identity as like only and exclusively in opposition to what you're not, right? The binary of what you are versus what you're not is the thing that sort of supports the self structure. And we come up with all of these other binaries in the meantime to hide that one, right? Because one of the things that we say in my house all the time is that it doesn't have to make sense, it just has to work, and it works by you not seeing it. So if you're seeing all of these binaries and you're seeing the sort of arbitrary nature of them or the constructed nature of them, then you're going to keep following it down. And as you keep following it down, eventually you get to the binary of me, not me, right? Which is the subject-object binary. And that's where I've been spending a lot of my time lately, is like just feeling into that. It certainly hasn't dropped away entirely for me yet. But I feel it weakening. I feel it sort of flickering around the edges. And the more it starts flickering, the more I'm noticing other binaries that exist to maintain it, and the ways that they come in when I'm feeling reactive or triggered or uncomfortable in some way. And a really, like, I think we've said this in past videos, but a really good example of that is difficult and easy, right? As these binaries that we come up with and then assign value to. Because that's the other part of it, right? Is it's not just that we're coming up with these binaries and then they just sit there. Like, we're assigning value to them, and obviously good, bad being its own binary too, right? But hard and easy is such a good one for me. It's such a like juicy one, because there's this sort of, it can be categorized, it can be value judged in two different ways, right? Like hard in terms of hard work, or, you know, like doing things the hard way. Like that can be a good thing. It can be presented as this, like, this is the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to be like putting in all this effort because it's supposed to be something you're doing, right? And that's a way of supporting the identity structure too, right? Versus the easy way being like taking the easy way out. And that is supposed to come as sort of a threat to the identity structure when you're categorizing it that way. But the other version of that, of course, is that there's an inherent desire for a lot of people for things to be easier, to not be so hard, to make things easier for yourself, right? Like, why are you making things so hard for yourself? Was a thing that I heard a lot as a child. And we've started saying hard is not bad, simple is not easy. Because there's a lot of things that can be hard without that needing to be a binary categorization, right? Things can be difficult or uncomfortable without there needing to be any value judgment placed on that or any contrast create, like any supporting, like there is, it's not like this is hard and therefore there is an easy way that I need to find. And that's the impulse that I find. Like, if this is hard, I need to find a way to make it easier. So much of that has to do with control, I think. Like the desire to control your experience, to make it yours, right? To objectify the experience as your own. And it comes up in the value judgments we place on emotions too, the categorization of some emotions as good versus bad or negative versus positive, right? Yeah, and I'm also I've recently been looking at, one of my special interests is like religious history. And I've been looking at the development of the canon of the New Testament and how that came to be in like a social context in first, second, and third centuries CE. And one of the things that's super, super noticeable as I read through that is that there's this, there's a binary that people even then were splitting things into, which is truth and falsehood, right? Truth and heresy, really. And this idea that truth can exist as an objective thing that we can hold, that we can define, that we can maintain unchanging. And that anything that falls outside of that truth is necessarily false, necessarily untrue. Because the only way that anything can be true or untrue is in comparison to each other, right? Something can only be untrue in comparison to a substantiated truth. And the more I dig into my own belief systems, the more of that just collapses. And I've started, I don't know if any of you guys have seen the Marcel the Shell viral video from like 15 years ago. I'm dating myself. But there's a part where he says,
someone once told me that my head was too big for my body, and I said, compared to what?
Compared to what? That, someone saying like, this is the truth. Well, compared to what? Compared to something that's the falsehood? Compared to everything else? How are we separating this out? What's the dividing line? Says who? That's another one that's been increasingly present for me. It's just says who. That's good, that's bad, says who? Me? Most of the time not. Most of the time it's not me. My parents, my family, people I have known over the course of my life, societal expectations. Like who's setting these binaries even? But we all buy into them. We all buy into them, and then they hold up this structure where everything has to be one way or another. And if it's not one way or another, then people don't know what to do with it. I think that's part of why it's coming up a lot for me as I have been working through some really, really foundational elements, beliefs in the self structure. because so much of it revolves around a very early recognition that people didn't really know what to do with me. And I think part of that was a determination to understand, and therefore a lack of willingness to automatically comply. And compliance is part of what makes it work, whatever you want to define it as. The self, society, interpersonal relationship, subject, object. Like, compliance with the baseless assertion of binaries, acceptance of binaries as necessary or inherent or part of the natural ordering of things. Like, that's required for it to keep working. And so when you don't do that, if you're, you know, as a child especially, but even coming into like now in my adulthood, like if you are not willing to comply with the maintenance of that structure, you're a problem. You now need to be categorized into a binary, right? Into like and have a value judgment placed on you, because, and so much of that, again, for me as a kid, so much of that was that categorization took place as being difficult, right? It's just all nonsense. It really is all nonsense, because they just all start collapsing. And when they start collapsing, they become these paradoxes that seem like they can't possibly be true, right? Like, how can something be true and untrue at the same time? Or how can something be neither true nor untrue? Or how can, you know, and it's the reason for so much like tribalism too, where it's like, no, we're the good ones. We're the ones who have it right. We are the ones who have the truth, the understanding, the knowledge, the whatever. And those other people don't. That other way of understanding, that other way of being, that's not the right way. And it contributes so much to suffering. There's just so much suffering in it. And the more I look directly at it, the more I'm like, oh, none of this is real. Like, it's not like, well, I have to just find the one real thing. Real and unreal. What's masculine and feminine is another one, right? That's been a big one in terms of like, I have been simultaneously trained throughout the course of my life to suppress feminine aspects of my energetic presence, and also identify with femininity, so that the identity becomes an identity of suppression. And then there's the rewarding of masculine, but only from masculine presenting, like masculinity in women, because again, we're categorizing these into two things, and men get masculinity and women get femininity. And if you have masculinity and feminine, then that's a problem. And then if you have femininity in men, that's also equally rejected. And then you have to, but you also can't have too much of your, like, of the femininity in the like it's a control thing. It's such a control thing. And I bought in so hard. I really, not specifically on like along gender lines, but in terms of the like, oh, this is like being overly emotional, right? That is presented as something that is inherently feminine and therefore it needs to be suppressed. Or sensitive, right? Being overly sensitive. But then also on the other side, being a know-it-all or being bossy, right? Like you can't have either. So it's the only reason that it exists is as a thing to oppose. It's a thing to embody and then a thing to oppose, and neither of them are really clearly defined, and putting every individual person into a position where they're just existing in this thought-based world of binaries that they have been conditioned to stay in. Means that nobody has the room to actually look at any of it closely. It takes up so much space. It takes up so much energy, and none of it is real. It's becoming increasingly hard to talk to people for me, actually, which is weird because it's uncomfortable because I do a lot of talking to people in my job. It's like a primary component of my job. And I don't know how to talk in binaries anymore. Because it just all feels fake. It all feels made up. It feels like talking nonsense. But if you say that to a person and then you try to describe sort of the paradoxical nature of both and neither existing simultaneously, or we're taking all of these experiences and bifurcating them for no reason other than we feel like a need for there to be bifurcation always. I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling at this point, but I'm just seeing it more. And as it happens, it's increasingly becoming like obvious energetically, even if not yet obvious indirect experience, that the bifurcation of self and other, subject and object, is just also not real. It's like when you're looking at an optical illusion and you can tell that it's an optical illusion, but you can't quite see it yet. That's how I feel. But I'm gonna keep looking.